First off, my name is Marc Seewald. I'm in the Oracle Product Management Organization. I'm based out of our San Francisco headquarters. I have responsibility for a few different domains within the EPM group, and I'll be covering the presentation today. But obviously, since it's such a small audience, we can make this pretty informal, so don't hesitate to ask questions or bring anything up as we go through this. The topic of the presentation is on marketing planning. Obviously, in the cloud, marketing is a good example of some of the operational use cases from a strategy standpoint. EPM, one of the big things we're investing in is not just making great corporate financial planning software, but also operational planning. So I don't know how many of you, show of hands, how many showed up to the Sunday Symposium? Anybody at the Sunday? Okay, so one person. So during the Sunday Symposium, we shared some of the strategy around that. Actually, later today, the next session in the same room, we're covering another operational planning scenario around HR. This one's obviously focused on marketing. The way we'll start out the presentation is that I'll talk a little bit more about the strategy of what we're doing beyond what we call beyond finance, connecting financial planning with the corporate operational planning. And then we'll get into the marketing capability, and then we'll finish up talking about a little bit more of the use cases. So first off, let's talk about really the challenges with operational planning versus traditional corporate FP&A planning. Obviously, using planning software, whether it's on-premise, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's Oracle, whether it's not Oracle, automating your planning and forecasting processes can be a big benefit to corporate FP&A. But there's still room for improvement. Basically, when you see a traditional FP&A style planning and forecasting system, you'll typically have finance people, obviously all users of the system at the corporate level. You'll typically have some finance people embedded maybe in some of the operations. You'll have cost center managers submitting budgets and department managers submitting budgets and forecasts and so forth. But for the most part, that level of detail that's in the corporate FP&A tends to be at a very high level segment for a majority of what we see across our certainly larger customers. The operational level of detail is still primarily done in spreadsheets or offline type systems. So for example, a sales team coming up with their quarterly forecasts, coming up with their quota and territory planning efforts, most of that's all done on spreadsheets. Marketing folks, there's typically somebody in marketing with the title marketing finance. They're planning out all their campaigns, they're planning out how they want to spend their marketing budget. That's done in Excel spreadsheets. HR does the long range planning around skill sets. IT, I don't know how many of you might be in part of the IT organization, but IT typically wants to do financial analysis around how they're spending their budgets. They're typically planning down at an IT project level of detail. And they want to break up their spend into different categories, like how much money am I spending on running the business versus growing the business versus transforming the business. So there's all these different operational needs, for the most part, are being done by Excel spreadsheets. And the problem is that all this process being done in Excel spreadsheets means that from a finance perspective, you really lack transparency. You're disconnected to what's happening around the rest of the enterprise. So for example, just to give you a good example, you may be able to see that a cost center or a line of business has missed their budget, maybe it's above or below, but you have no idea why. So that's one good example of how you lack transparency in the operations. Also, it's inefficient. Think about it. Basically, at planning and forecasting time, maybe it's a monthly reforecast or a quarterly reforecast you're doing, someone is keying something into spreadsheets and then rekeying that same number into your planning and forecasting system. So big opportunity to automate and connect those kind of processes, which allow you to speed up the broader planning and forecasting. And then last but not least is the fact that it tends to be a little bit short-term focused. This is not always the case, but a lot of corporate FP&A systems tend to be a little bit more focused on the fiscal year as opposed to maybe the operational needs of the enterprise. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. IT departments. IT departments don't have IT projects that fit nicely into fiscal years. They typically span years. Marketing departments are the same way. Sales tends to be a little more fiscal focused, but skill sets obviously go beyond fiscal years. So the kind of planning and forecasting operations folks needs to do tends to be very different and is really underserved. What we believe in Oracle is that really we have the ability to meet the operational needs of these folks around the enterprise, and really importantly, one of the things that's going to make it successful is the ability to take ownership And that's certainly, we have many customers from a planning perspective on-premise that have rolled out operational planning systems. We know it. We estimate about 30% of our customers roll out operational planning. But it tends to be a pretty expensive effort, tends to be a timely effort, and you sometimes don't always have as much success as you want. And I'll talk about some of the factors why we think cloud is going to make that different. But number one, you'll see that each set of stakeholders can have their own line of business owned business process. So sales doesn't have to be dependent on somebody in finance necessarily to update drivers or make some basic changes. It has that operational level of detail. And then last but not least, it allows you to connect the operational planning with the corporate FP&A planning, which again allows you to speed things up, gives you better transparency, allows you to ensure there's better controls around things like entities or cost centers and things of that nature. Now again, I alluded to the fact that obviously operational planning is something that's been done for decades now, but again, not significantly across our customer base. We believe that the cloud does make it much more practical and significantly increases the likelihood of success with an operational planning deployment for these three reasons. Number one, ownership is key. Stakeholders that are doing their operational planning can't be dependent on somebody back at corporate finance to do everything. And quite frankly, think about it. If you're a VP of sales and you're in the heat of the quarter close or year-end close, do you want to be reliant on some finance person to update the system, and that finance person is trying to update systems for everybody around the enterprise? Sales wants to own their own system. IT wants to own their own system. Marketing wants to own their system. So the concept of ownership is important, and the cloud lowers that threshold, makes ownership more practical. And now the next two reasons kind of relate to that. First is ease of use. Some of the areas that we've been investing in, particularly in the cloud, particularly in our enterprise cloud, you'll see we've really invested a lot in making it easier to administer the system. Now, I don't know how many of you folks might be Hyperion administrators, and maybe you know a lot about Essbase, and you probably don't need administrative wizards. You probably don't need it to be a whole lot easier because you know how to maintain it. But these operational planners don't. So the efforts we're making to make it easier to use, easier to maintain is particularly important. And then also another consideration on easy use is the fact that typically non-finance users tend to be a little bit less sophisticated than a finance user. So you think about a salesperson, you think about somebody in HR, you think about somebody in marketing. They're probably not going to be quite as tech savvy, quite as familiar with Excel spreadsheets and whatnot. And then last but not least is obviously cost. The cloud significantly, materially lowers the threshold for investment in operational planning systems. So you're not investing in the hardware, the implementations tend to be much quicker, and so forth. So again, the vision, the big marketing slide that we have here is that everybody, all the different stakeholders around the enterprise, whether it's the executive at the corporate FP&A level, you can be doing strategy with our new strategic modeling capability. Finance can be doing the traditional corporate FP&A type planning, and each one of the stakeholders around the enterprise can be doing the level of planning. Because the fact is there's wherever there is an operational number you're trying to hit or a financial number you're trying to hit, people are doing planning and forecasting. So that gives you a little bit of background on our strategy. And we are step-by-step investing in each one of those areas. Our first area that we invested in was the HR domain. We're also, right now, we've launched our marketing, and we're working on sales performance management right now. We've also released an IT product. But let's get into the marketing section. So I'll start out a little bit of the presentation here on marketing with just a few facts, just to give you kind of a little bit of insight. First off question, is anybody an expert in marketing? Does anybody come from the marketing department? Okay, I didn't think so. So I'm not a marketing expert necessarily either, but just a couple facts to give you a little bit of background on why marketing financial management or marketing planning is important. Number one, you can see the first thing, this comes from Gartner, industry analyst. Typically, Gartner estimates for larger multinationals about 11% of total revenue is invested in marketing. Marketing is a big area of focus these days. Think about social media marketing, think about digital marketing. It has just blown up, even compared to 5 years ago. The amount of investment going into marketing is enormous. So 11% of total revenue going into this big area, and it's all being managed through spreadsheets. Over on the right-hand side of the page, 79% of marketers typically own their own P&L. So they're owning a P&L, and they're trying to manage that business, running it in a spreadsheet. Another good example, 10% of marketers feel that they actually can measure the results of their marketing performance. So again, they're not being effective they don't feel like they're being effective. Maybe they're being effective from a marketing perspective, but they don't know exactly how to measure the results of what their campaigns are doing. And then last but not least, obviously, if you think about the discussion that needs to go on between a chief marketing officer and a chief financial officer, every year they're trying to justify those budgets. And what does a CFO want to see? Hey, say, show me the results of your marketing. Show me, justify why that budget should be 11%. We could use that money elsewhere. Why can't we cut that budget down to 10% or 11%? Or 9%, I should say. So anyhow, obviously, the more a marketer can obviously relate their budget and their spend in terms that finance understands, it helps them justify their budget. So again, I think obviously marketers want to have better financial management capability. So really, just to summarize the last few points that I said, if you were to talk to someone back at your organization around marketing, really, why do what we're calling marketing financial management? Number one, marketing spend is material, 11%. Number two, typically there's a bit of a mismatch. The people, finance and marketing, it's kind of like Venus and Mars. They don't necessarily talk the same language. So by putting a marketing team or the marketing finance folks onto a system, leveraging the same kind of best practices, driver-based planning, rolling forecasts, leveraging that same kind of capability that finance uses, it gives them a ability to have a meaningful dialogue. And then last but not least is again, it gives you insight into the actual results. You'll see an acronym there called ROMI, R-O-M-I. That stands for Return on Marketing Investment. So that means for the amount of money you've invested, can you justify that based on the sales that it's generated? So that's one of the big metrics that a marketing department, it's an operational metric. Kind of questions that marketers are trying to answer, when it comes to looking at their numbers. And I kind of call it marketing financial management as well as marketing planning. I'd say it's not just planning. Typically, it's you're obviously doing your plans and your budgets around your marketing spend, but they want to do the analysis on the actuals as well. They want to go back and look at the historical campaigns and say, hey, I estimated that I was going to spend this much on this marketing campaign. I ended up spending maybe a little bit more. But what did it return me? How many new sales did it generate? So they're looking to say, hey, what marketing campaigns have the greatest return? There's certain kind of maybe TV campaigns versus email campaigns, and what are the ones that I want to use in the future based on their historical results? How do I allocate my budget across different product lines? Typically, you might have multiple brands that you're marketing for. You might have multiple regions you're marketing for. A lot of times that third item alone is actually very difficult for a marketing department to even understand. They don't even know how much of their own budget they've spent. It's typically locked up in line items within the chart of accounts, and those line items are very rarely tied back to marketing campaigns. So it's very hard for them to pull data out of the general ledger and actually just even understand how much of their marketing budget is left. So those are all things typically done via a spreadsheet today and can be easily automated in an EPM style system. And then how do I spend the remainder of my budget, obviously? Halfway through the year, it's getting a little tight. What's the best way? Maybe I want to reallocate that budget. And then a little bit about what the kind of the landscape looks like. On the left-hand side of the page, again, not every company, not every industry is going to be aligned like this. Certain industries like maybe healthcare maybe has a little bit different makeup from marketing. But CPG industry, if you're in a pharmaceutical industry, marketing's massive. Retail marketing is massive. Financial services marketing is massive. High tech. At Oracle, we have all three of these things on the left-hand side. We have a corporate marketing team. Those are the folks that buy our TV ads or do radio ads or any kind of big type media. We have brand marketing. That may be that next step down. So who's the people that does the marketing at the Hyperion level of detail? And then you have the field marketing. So if you've ever been invited to a sales event and a bunch of salespeople are there and they put on a webcast for you or they put on a presentation for you, that comes out of the field marketing team. All that's being managed by the marketing department, and they're typically doing it from spreadsheets. On the right-hand side of the screen there, you can see the systems that they pull from. They typically need to pull from ERP. They're trying to get that general ledger detail to see where their costs are coming from. They often want to look at, they're interacting with EPM from a forecasting standpoint, typically. CRM, obviously, they're looking at those opportunities coming out of the CRM system. And then also there's marketing automation systems. Marketing automation systems are the systems that help them generate their campaigns. So if you're doing an email campaign, that's typically being done out of an automation system. So you're pulling data from a lot of systems, putting it into Excel spreadsheets, and then you're presenting it back to your stakeholders, whether it's the CMO, whether it's the CFO, whether it's the brand champions, the people who are responsible for those brands. They want to understand how the marketing's being done, but a lot of data being consumed and manipulated in Excel spreadsheets. So what we've come up with in the Planning Cloud is really a focused product specifically built for the operational planning within marketing. And you can see what we talk about. We actually leverage our ePBCS, or our Enterprise PBCS framework. If you're familiar with the Enterprise framework, I'll talk about it a little bit more here in a moment. Enterprise PBCS has 4 specific pre-built frameworks: financial statement planning, project financial planning, workforce planning, and capital expenditure planning. So we leverage both the financial statement planning to help them do their spend analysis, and then kind of matching up to how much budget's been spent year to date, and then we use our projects framework to actually do the campaign planning. And that may not sound immediately intuitive, but a marketing campaign is nothing more than a project. You're dedicating resources to it. You're spending money against that. So it's a perfect scenario for project financial planning. But sure. Yeah, you can purchase ePBCS today, and I'll show you how to do this actually. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to cover the steps. You can purchase ePBCS today and set it up for marketing planning. So it's not a separate module, not a separate price. We're leveraging the existing framework, and there's a template on top of it. So we've launched this capability. This capability is available today on the ePBCS platform, but we're going to continue to build in it. So for example, right now you wouldn't have a lot of pre-built reports or pre-built dashboards in the system. Over the course of the next couple of years, we'll continue to deliver more pre-built content coming out of the box. But you can do this today on Enterprise PBCS. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so just to give you an example, I don't have any case studies in here, but I can talk about them. There's 2 large companies that are doing it today in the Enterprise PBCS framework. That's Pepsi Asia specifically. So Pepsi Asia has purchased ePBCS, and they're using it today. They're live on the system. Unilever is in the process of implementing it as well. They're rolling around regional marketing systems all over. Basically, the way they've chose to do it is instead of doing it at the corporate level, they're doing it for every one of their major markets. So basically, U.S. is a major market for Unilever. Unilever is a CPG industry, lots of different brands they have to manage. So, and then they've got markets in Europe, markets in Asia, and so forth. So those are companies using it today. Just a couple of examples, but we'll continue to invest in it over time. So it's going to be even more mature over time. So for a good example of it is one of the things we want to do is pre-built integration with the pre-built integration with the Marketing Cloud. So I mentioned marketing automation software. Right now, you can pull data from any of those systems, but it would, requires you to map it and things like that. One of the things we're working on is make sure that's a seamless automation. So in the Oracle Cloud, for example, we're not complete with our integration. We're still working from a roadmap perspective. The Oracle, I know many of you might use EBS or PeopleSoft or SAP, so not a lot of people might not be on Oracle Cloud ERP yet, but we've done integration between EPM Cloud and ERP Cloud. And we've just delivered, just recently, just this month, we've delivered integration between EPM and HCM. Our next step will, quite frankly, might be projects, between the Projects Cloud, and then the step after that, we'll start with a CX. So CX is where the marketing stuff is and the sales stuff is. But anyhow, this system allows you to do the ROMI calculations, return on marketing investment, and again, I think the big benefit here is it gives marketing a tool that helps them automate what they're doing in Excel, but it keeps them aligned to finance. So there's enormous value. So I've got a bit of a screenshot demo here. It's not a live demo, but I think it's helpful for you folks because it does allow you to go back to your company and share these slides. These slides are up in the ODTUG website right now, so you can download them. We're going to go through a little bit of a demo, kind of a screenshot demo here, walking through targeting planning. So target planning, setting high-level budgets and allocating them down to regions or allocating them down to brands. We're going to look at specific campaign planning, so that's more of individual campaigns. And then lastly, I'll give you some good examples of that marketing financial analysis that companies want to do. So first off, we start with the interface. Those of you who are probably, I'm sure if you've sat in on any one of our EPM Cloud presentations, you've seen this look and feel. It does look a little bit different than the rest of the old or the traditional on-premise interface. The classic UI is what we call it. This is called the simplified user interface. You'll notice up in the top left-hand corner, we have something called marketing. If I click on that, that'll drill into the different specific categories of marketing capability. Importantly, this interface also is a mobile-enabled interface, so you could access that from a tablet device. Now, if I were to drill into target planning, for example, here you can see a dashboard. Dashboarding is a big area that we're investing in. So over the last couple of years, we've really wanted to make visualizations real-time in our software. We're not trying to be BI. BIs are a different kind of capability, but we wanted to bring real-time visualizations, some basic visualizations. And this is a good example. If you look up in the top left-hand corner, in the back room, it might be hard to see this, so I'll kind of describe what you're looking at. You can see spend scenarios. I think scenario planning is something operational planners tend to do a lot of. In corporate FP&A, we do a lot of that as well, but I think you tend to see a lot of that throughout the year. Sandboxing, scenario analysis, that's a big thing. Down in the bottom part of the left-hand portion of the screen, you can see the spend by region. You've got to take one big budget you're allocated. You've got to figure out how much I'm spending in North America, Europe, Asia, and so forth. You can see top program spend, what are the different categories that I want to spend my money on. Am I spending primarily on events, on TV? Am I spending it on digital? Where are my spend categories? So operational type KPIs. Now, let's go into target planning. This is more of that top-down target. So I got a big number, it's a new fiscal year, how am I going to spend that budget? So over on the left-hand side of the page, you can see some of the planning. We're looking at historical data for actuals. We're looking at forecasts for the remainder of FY16, and we're looking at the new plan number for FY17. And instead of planning across things like a P&L, they're obviously planning things that make sense to a marketer, at that operational level of detail. The next tab here you'll see is regional spend. So you might start by just planning at the highest levels, then figuring out how you break it into the regions, and then I'd start to do maybe some scenario analysis. So you'll see exactly how that looks. So now that I've done my kind of top-down plans, and I can start to break it down into my regions. Here, again, may be hard to see in the back of the room, but I'm looking at that same level of detail, events, campaigns, digital, print. Now I'm starting to allocate it out to the different regions. Marketing East, marketing West, marketing Central. That's precisely the way, even at Oracle, that's precisely the way our sales team is aligned and the way our marketing teams are aligned as well. Quite frankly, we have four areas instead of 3, but very typical way for marketing departments to allocate budget. And then last but not least, again, I think something that's very important is again, as I mentioned, that scenario analysis. So what's my plan? What's my aggressive plan? What's the best case scenario? And the categories down below you can see of how that plan's broken out. Now, getting into actual more of a kind of the planning activity you would have really around all the different marketing teams. All the different marketing teams want to do lots of different campaigns throughout the year. Every fiscal year, the marketing department puts together their campaigns, and you need to submit budgets around that. How much is it going to cost for this campaign? Maybe I can't afford that campaign, this campaign or that campaign. So we're leveraging here, you can see this is our project financial planning network, framework that we're leveraging. Down the left-hand side of the page, you can see that we are identifying the different campaigns. So the example campaigns we've set up here, Summer Bash, Sporting Frenzy, Social Media Accelerator, blah, blah, blah. What's the start date and end date of those campaigns? Are we going to use some standard labor assumptions? And that's important. Marketers sometimes are using third parties. They're outsourcing their spend to vendors. So they can make some standard assumptions around maybe rates that have already been negotiated with those vendors. Then they can come in and actually plan all those different campaigns. Now, finally, one of the really nice pieces of analysis. This is the holy grail of what marketers are trying to get to, It's not just helping them build up their plans and manage their financials, but actually trying to get back to the return on marketing. And you can see that. Now you can take a look at your campaigns, and you can see the opportunities won, the actual investment that you made, and basic simple division gives you the return on marketing investment. So tying this data, the opportunities won would come out of your CRM system. So you're pulling that data coming out of your CRM system, you're tying the actual budget, that's the amount you spent in a campaign, and that gives you your return on marketing investment. So very quickly, you can go back through all your historical campaigns and start to sort and filter them and say, well, all of a sudden I can start to see a trend in the most successful campaigns that I've had. So you can see ROMI at the top. At the bottom, you can do variance analysis. Variance analysis may seem really boring to most folks, but let me tell you, if you don't have a planning tool to help you do that, it takes a lot of time to do variance analysis. Question? Yeah, I think we provide a set of drivers out of the box, but I think I'd say that it's important to set the expectation that pretty much you would probably set up some of your own specific drivers, because there's a lot of variance between industries. So, yeah.
I would customize it, but
yep.
Out of box. And the reason why I asked that question is, so if we have a situation where we purchase, let's say PBCS, we go ahead and have financial planning done, project planning done, workforce done. Now the marketing department comes in and says, hey, I actually want to do the same planning using this tool.
Yep.
Now, what option do I have? Do I create separate plan types within project and
No, great question. Great question, yeah.
Separate instance we're talking about?
It's a separate instance, a separate application. And that's precisely it may not have been clear when I pointed it out previously, but each stakeholder, so marketing being one stakeholder, sales being one stakeholder, IT one stakeholder, should have their own application. So they're leveraging projects for purposes, the project's plan type for purposes of marketing. Finance might leverage projects for purposes of finance. So two separate applications. Okay, and then the final screenshot here, which is the real big one as well, is just do an analysis on, once you get the appropriate financial numbers, you can actually start to drive, again, operational metrics on the planning as well. Again, might be hard to see in the back of the room, but once you know the budget or the amount of spend you've had on a campaign, you can see $860,000 spent on this campaign, and you know exactly how many emails you sent out, you know exactly how many of those emails were opened, you know exactly how many of those emails resulted in a click. So you've gotten junk emails like this before, I'm sure. A lot of times you delete them, but sometimes you might open it and it takes you to Amazon's webpage. And if Amazon's tracking you, if you buy that package, that goes as a score there in their marketing department. And obviously just do some basic math, cost per click, cost per email, cost per win, and so forth. So that's the kind of analysis that marketing departments are absolutely trying to get to, and enormous benefit if you can help them do that. So the a little bit of background on just the enterprise framework. I talked about it. If you're not familiar with it, I'll give you a little bit more of an overview. Enterprise PBCS is a framework on top of PBCS effectively, and it is the trend. We're seeing most of our customers going forward with ePBCS for traditional financial planning as well as operational planning. It now comes with 5 modules. There are 5 frameworks. Originally when it was launched, it had 4 frameworks. It now has a 5th framework called Strategy. That's new as of this month. That red circle on the left-hand side is the strategic modeling capability. Strategic modeling is a great capability. It has its legacy in Hyperion Strategic Finance, if you're not familiar with that. Fantastic capability. We've done a number of breakouts just on that topic, I think, here at the conference. And that just comes in for free, no additional cost. It's a part and parcel of the ePBCS framework. The 4 remaining frameworks are pre-built frameworks that are designed to be configured. So they're not necessarily industry specific, but they come with pre-built drivers, pre-built calculations, pre-built dashboards, nice user experience and so forth. Financials is for traditionally from a financial perspective, from a finance, corporate FP&A, that would be financial statement planning. So your income statement, your balance sheet, your cash flow planning. It can also be, from an operational perspective, it can be used for any kind of spend analysis. marketing spend, IT spend, and so forth. Workforce is a great framework. Most finance departments want to do some sort of analysis around workforce. Most industries, most companies, workforce tends to be one of your biggest spend categories, one that fluctuates a lot. So compensation planning, all the related expenses, from your salary expenses and so forth. Capital expenditure planning, and then project financial planning. And again, projects and financials is what we leverage for purposes of the marketing. I've already talked about this slide. I've probably stolen my thunder a little bit, but again, projects on the left-hand side of the page is what we use for the marketing investments and financial performance, and the financials is what we use for the target and spend. So let's talk a little bit more about how you set that up. So what's really important, I think, to point out, if you were to go show a marketer your corporate FP&A planning and forecasting system, they probably wouldn't be too impressed because it doesn't mean anything to them. So one of the important things that you need to have in any operational planning system is it all needs to be in the context that makes sense to them. So something as basic and maybe not obvious to most people is you would not want to have an account dimension. It can still be the account dimension, but you don't call it the account dimension. Call it spend category, or work with your marketing team and figure out whatever makes sense to them. But just don't start with the assumption that what makes sense for finance makes sense for your operational planners. So you'll see the dimensions down the left-hand side of the page, but the very first dimension, typically when you talk about dimensions, account's always the first dimension, but marketing cares about spend categories, and they only have a handful of accounts that really matter to them, so that's probably going to end up being a relatively small dimension. I'll call out a couple other dimensions. Anything in red there are the dimensions that are a little bit more interesting. Anything in black are going to be things that are probably a little more well understood, but brand dimension instead of a product dimension. Channel typically is going to be a really important dimension. What are the different methods on marketing? Is it digital? Is it social media? Is it TV, radio, events, blah, blah, blah. Initiative, that's kind of an additional program dimension for, that is the, no. I believe that's where we had, the initiatives are where you would have kind of break up your campaigns into related categories. So campaigns, you might have a whole category for, let's say you're a candy company and you want to market around Halloween. You might have multiple campaigns going, but you want to relate it all to like Halloween marketing or the holidays, Christmas, something like that. All right, so the steps, now I've oversimplified it, but just for purposes of conversation, the 11 steps on the screen are the steps that it takes to set up the software. First off, you create an ePBCS application. Second of all, you rename the dimensions to the dimensions that make sense to your marketing department, as I talked about in the previous slide. Third is you enable financials and you enable projects. Enabling, if you haven't seen it, a demonstration of that, you can see that down in the booth at the expo, but very easy to turn on and launch these modules. So you turn it on, you pick which features. We actually have some guidance around which features you should turn on. You configure your metadata, so you set up your brand dimension, you set up your channels that make sense, you go through setting up targets, scenarios, setting up drivers, define your dashboards in step 10, and then you set up navigation and security. So, pretty defined, easy way to set it up. That's really some of the value of our ePBCS framework. You don't start with a blank sheet of paper and build from scratch like you might often do with a traditional planning and forecasting system. It is designed to be a little bit more rapid in deployment than typical type planning and forecasting systems. So in summary, it really gives you kind of a comprehensive marketing-owned type system, something that, we have nice administrative wizards in the system, so you might still be supporting the marketing department to a certain extent, but the goal would be to make them somewhat self-sufficient on it, so they can at least do some basic administrative type items themselves on it. You might still want to be in charge of maybe doing the metadata, or maybe you want to be in charge of doing security or something like that, but it should be owned by marketing. It's purpose-built, it's an operational system, it's going to use terms and calculations and dimension names that make sense to the marketers, and again, it's designed to be easy to implement and use. So finishing up the presentation, I just want to talk about a few other use cases that we're working on. This is one we're investing in right now. We call it sales performance management. Sales performance management obviously is separate from marketing, related to marketing, but sales is typically owned by somebody different than marketing. VP of sales and the chief marketing officer work together, but they typically are owned by two different people. Sales performance marketing is a industry term coined by Gartner. It encompasses really everything that sales ops does. I'm not sure how familiar you folks might be with it, but typically there's a group that supports the sales team. So instead of owning customers, they're actually helping administer the sales process, helping do contracts, estimating the forecast, things of that nature. A lot of those folks do things in Excel spreadsheets, so they're collecting forecasts. You might think that kind of information comes out of your CRM, but it typically doesn't. Forecasting today, for the most part, for sales teams, is still done in Excel spreadsheets. Sadly, even some of our own sales teams are still doing it in spreadsheets. We're trying to change that. Quota and territory management. At the beginning of every year, typically large sales organizations are realigning their quotas. Depending on how high or low your quota is, drives behavior within the sales force. Same with territory. You're often juggling territory, and that you want to start to do that at a low level, but make sure it all makes sense at a high level. So those three areas are really kind of where we're investing in. And you'll see that actually we're working with our CX team right now, so our sales team on the Oracle CX side, but it's also designed to sit on Salesforce.com. So if you don't use an Oracle product, this would still make sense for your team. Really interesting area. This is one I personally have a lot of passion around. Operational planning, or operational EPM, I should probably call it, for IT. There's a specific domain, again, coined by Gartner, called IT Financial Management. IT Financial Management is an operational financial management, operational for the IT. And what it focuses on is the fact that the IT organization today is rapidly evolving. If you think about what most of our IT organizations are going through, not every IT organization, but a lot of IT organizations are at some stage in their journey to the cloud. Maybe your finance software is not yet in the cloud, but I bet your CRM software is probably in the cloud. I bet some of your HR software is probably in the cloud. So most IT organizations are somewhere along that migration to the cloud. And as such, the IT's role is changing. Eventually, as more and more stuff goes to the cloud, IT spends less of their time just running the basics, keeping the lights on, applying patches, maintaining operating systems, data centers, things like that. They want to become more of a strategic partner with the business. Most IT, like CIOs, want to be more partnered with the business. As such, they want to run themselves more like a business. They want to have nice, financial best practices. There's typically a group within the CIO's organization called IT Finance. Those people are doing all their analytics in Excel spreadsheets. I have a lot of customer meetings at Oracle. When we bring our customers to Oracle's headquarters, we do what we call a CVC. A lot of CIOs come through and we give them presentations. When I present them our capability around this, they all get very excited because they, for the most part, are doing all their financial analytics in Excel. Two basic categories that is interesting in this area. First, in the first circle, shared services and chargeback. That is actually specific to the IT chargeback. So what happens in large multinationals, IT is a shared service center, basically. So all the different lines of businesses get a big chargeback every year. And if you've ever received a chargeback, you can be really frustrated by that. Because you might get an IT charge for $10 million one year, and the next year it's $14 million, and you have no idea why. Why did that go up? I don't feel like my team has grown. I don't feel like anything has changed in my little line of business. Why is the IT charge so much higher? So that is all about doing allocations and providing the transparency into those allocations of the shared services. And it's enormously important for IT to be able to show more transparency to the lines of businesses so those lines of businesses can understand how they can change their behavior to lower their shared services. In fact, when I talk to CIOs, a lot of times they have applications they know they're supporting that nobody is using, but they can't turn them off because they can't prove it. They can't. People are paying for things that they don't even know they're using. So that's an enormous area. And then the second circle, IT planning is a big area. Obviously, IT project financial planning, basically. Planning into IT projects, IT spend. I won't spend much time on this one. If you're interested in this one, there's actually the next presentation is on this topic. This is the HR domain. Most larger HR departments do some degree of skill set planning, and it focuses on, again, an operational planning scenario. Instead of planning dollars and cents, they're typically planning skill set. And it sounds kind of like maybe not that interesting, but it should be interesting. If you're in finance, if you're in corporate FP&A, if you're responsible for setting strategy at your enterprise, then you care about the skill sets of the organization. Because if they don't have the right skills at the right time, at the right place, at the right cost, you can't execute on your strategy. So finance should care about that. Basically what HR is doing is they're doing two things. On the left-hand side of the page, you can see it. They're trying to forecast the demand for skill sets, driver-based planning, and then forecast the demand for workforce supply. So what's workforce demand and workforce supply? Workforce demand is that, hey, in next year we want to expand into a new marketplace, or next year we're going to be launching a new product line, hey, something's rapidly evolving, we're doing some new systems implementations, we need some new skill set in this particular area. So that gives you one part of that equation. Second part, workforce supply. What happens if a crucial skill set, or a lot of people with a crucial skill set tend to be retiring over the next 3 or 4 years? What if there's a really tight labor market in one of your regions? That's going to impact your workforce supply. So doing that kind of analysis over 2, 3, 4, 5 year type time frame is what organizations like to do. And if you want to learn more about that, just stay here right in this room. My colleague Marc will be presenting on that in just a moment. So that is a whirlwind tour, guys. I'm ending a little early. I have plenty of time for any kind of questions. Happy to answer any questions on anything I presented, or really anything. If you guys have any questions around EPM, strategy, I'm an Oracle's product management organization. I can do my best to try to answer it. I'm not an expert in everything, but I can do my best. So any questions I can down front? Yeah, so the question down front, if you didn't hear it, was specifically around sales and IT. And it's similar to the question she'd asked earlier. Is this something I can do right now, or is this something I should wait and hold off on? And I'll give you two different answers, because IT, you can do it right now today. We launched that actually this spring, and we put a lot of work. We built a template. We built the drivers. We built the dimensions. We know exactly what's needed for all of those. So IT is ready to go right now. The sales one we're still working on. We'll probably be launching that more, obviously you can use planning right now today. You could always do it. Operational, on-premise planning, you can do cloud planning. So you could do it if you wanted to, but we're working on bringing a lot of enhancements that'll probably come out. We're not allowed to give time ranges here at ODTUG, but it'll come out in the next year.
So even for the IT, basically it sounds like it's what you do with the project model.
That's right, exactly.
Then you just bring different custom dimensions.
Right, and yes, that's right. And actually, I should clarify, for the IT financial management, I mentioned there's two domains. So we use ePBCS for the IT planning and spend planning, and then we use PCMCS, profitability and cost management, for the cost allocations. Exactly. So it's a purpose-built allocation tool as opposed to, you can do allocations and planning, obviously, but the value of having PCM, profitability and cost management, is it's a purpose-built allocation tool, and it gives you that transparency step by step through every stage of the allocation, and it's designed to be owned by a business person. It's not scripting. Yeah.
But then the question is, let's say if I don't have PBCS,
Mm-hmm.
I still need to do allocation, the allocation. Let's say this is the share cost here, it's not the IT corporate has to go to the share cost and push down.
Yep.
Can I build my customized, more like push down, really project module?
You can do allocations. If you can do allocations in planning right now, obviously, in ePBCS, in projects, in PBCS, you could even do it. So you could build them. The downside of building them in allocations in planning is it's done through scripting. So that's why, again, which is fine actually, if they're lightweight allocations, they don't change very much, and they the business doesn't care, doesn't want to change it frequently. It's fine to do it in planning. It's a great place to do it. It'll be effective. The problem when you do it in planning is sometimes it burdens down your planning and forecasting system. If they're really big and voluminous, you're putting data in there it doesn't need to be there. And then number two is if they change from time to time, you have to rely on somebody who's an expert in scripting to make that change. It's very common that a business person might want to say, well, hey, I want to change how this stage of the allocation is done from, instead of allocating on head count, I want to allocate on square footage or number of calls in a support center or something like that. Those, in a purpose-built tool, those changes can be made in seconds, just a couple clicks of a mouse. In a planning, you're changing script. So
So for the marketing piece, you show everything that we see currently available, we're able to build it.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Any other questions?
manage their, I'm sorry, not ROI, but their return on marketing investment.
Yep.
How does that link up to, I've got a whole application where they can track their spend, see what's working for them, what's not working. How does someone use that to say, this is what you forecasted, right? So how do you link the two? And, because no one in marketing is really going to go, these numbers that I wrote. It's going to say, these are my variances, right? So you need some kind of interconnection so someone in finance can understand what they forecasted, because they also have like slush funds,
Right. Yep. Exactly.
So how do you link the two?
So I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
So from a planning perspective, right? So you're starting your full year budget.
Yeah.
And they, or 2-year, whatever. They come up with their, what they're going to spend in advertising, what they're going to spend in some trade shows, what
Yep.
they're going to spend on other things, right? How do I link that to financial statements? This is exactly what they're going to spend by account.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Right.
How do I tie that back on a monthly basis when you have your actuals come in, so that from a P&L perspective, I can say, hey, the favorable due to this.
Right.
Now they're pushing us down to another month.
Yep.
So that way they get what they need, but someone in finance also gets.
That's right. That's yeah. One of the biggest challenges for marketers, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is that you might get in the general ledger, you'll see an expense. There'll be but you can't tie that expense necessarily back to a campaign. So one of the enhancements, a good example of where we're going to enhance, is we want to be able to give an interface that allows you to bring line items in from the general ledger, and then allows you to break that line item out into the campaigns. So that'd be something a marketer would do, and they'd say like, oh, okay, this receipt came in. This is an expense. I see it came from my vendor. My vendor actually was doing stuff for 3 campaigns, so I can see that was a $10,000 charge. And I'm going to say about most of that $10,000 was 90% of it was for one campaign, 5% for another campaign, and 5% for the other campaign. So, and then we would do the math and allocate those out to the campaigns. That's one of the enhancements we want to do. That's not there right now. Yep. Yeah, exactly. I mean that. So number one, and it depends. If your marketing department's very small, maybe it makes sense to keep it in Excel. If it's a small marketing department, do everything in Excel. It's fine. But when you have a large, complex marketing department, a lot of moving parts, you're spending a lot of money. There's a lot of work. They spend an enormous amount of time. Just like finance, they have tons and tons of spreadsheets, and they have a spreadsheet that's called Final, and another one that's called Final, and another one's called Final. I mean, it's the exact same thing we have in finance. So the idea is give them an operational planning system at their level of detail, and then you can take it. So let's say you want to have the marketing spend updated on a monthly forecast or a quarterly forecast. You can translate their operational detail and pull it into your corporate FP&A planning system. But the great thing now, instead of waiting for somebody in marketing to rekey the numbers into your corporate FP&A system, you can just push a button. It's that easy. Yeah, so you have 2 options. So let's say you're on-premise planning, you're using on-premise planning for corporate FP&A, and you want to use this cloud-based solution for marketing. If you're using FDMEE, and then you're on 11.124, you can pull data out of the cloud directly into your corporate FP&A system. So you can source from the cloud and move it down to your on-premise planning system. Yeah, of course. Yep, yeah. Yeah, so the spend categories, quite frankly, I mean, they probably would be very closely aligned to your chart of accounts. I mean, it's travel and entertainment. It's going to be, vendor spend. I don't know the different account names, but you can imagine the names that you'd be, account names. Exactly. And you still have an entity dimension, so so you're very likely in the marketing system, you're going to have the similar dimensions to your corporate FP&A system, but you're just going to have additional dimensions that corporate FP&A doesn't care about. Corporate FP&A doesn't care about channels. Corporate FP&A probably doesn't care about brands. So, yeah. That makes sense? Okay. Any other questions? Down front?
I don't have a question, but I just want to make a comment. I see this can apply to my organization. I see the benefits. My company has like globally everywhere and has more than 20 different ERPs.
Yep.
So I see there's a lack of more like a global visibility.
Right.
Like currently we just went live HFM, which is financial consolidation. Yes, you from top all the way to the bottom.
Right.
You see that.
Good.
But that's pure financial.
Right, exactly.
Now I'm thinking all those IT, sales, and marketing. If we have those budgeting, forecasting tools, bring to the standardization, then you from the top to every, and now you have the full visibility.
Exactly.
Currently, you have no idea.
That's exactly right.
Everyone's ERPs and your Excel spreadsheet.
That's exactly right. And the problem is you wouldn't want to put all that detail in HFM because it would blow it up. So you want to, you can, but using your data governance, metadata governance, you can ensure it all reconciles, right? So it's one source of the truth, but just purpose built for each stakeholder. Good. All right, well, thanks a lot, guys. I know this is the last day, or I think it's not the last day, but hopefully your conference has been going good, and thanks for attending my breakout. At least I had a few people, so thank you.